Welcome, wannabes and creators, to The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps creatives lead a more fulfilling and creative life. That includes mindset tricks, sales tactics, basically everything to grow and maintain your creative business. Now, some of you are listening to this thinking, wasn't this the feed for the business of art a long, long time ago? And the answer is yes. Yes, it was. The Business of Art was a show that I ran from 2016, January of 2016 to November of 2017. But then I went on a long hiatus. And during that time, I built this other brand called The Complete Creative, which is a website that helps you make the best work of your life and share it with the world. And I always wanted to come back to this show. In fact, of all the things that I've ever abandoned in my life, and as a creative person, for everything you get out in the world, you abandon a lot more. There's only one thing that I regret, and it was giving up this podcast. It was a way for me 1 hour a week to talk with somebody that I really respected in the industry, give myself a chance to learn, and to talk to you as well. So for the last 18 months, I've been planning a return of this show. And I've been planning a guest to bring on that would be worthy of the relaunch of this podcast. And for at least the last year, I always knew that that person was Marv Wolfman. Marv Wolfman has been a huge influence in my creative career. He's a good friend of mine, and he was incredibly influential in the medium that broke me into being able to do this for a living, and that is comics. So if you liked our old show, the format is very much the same. I even use the same intro music. I use the same question to start the podcast, which is, tell me what you're passionate about these days. And the conversations are going to be kind of the same, but also very different. And the reason is because when I first started this show, I was very concerned with breaking in. And while I'm still concerned with that, I'm more concerned with staying in and sustaining a career and keeping the energy to make a career succeed for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, which is why Marv is such a huge get for me as an interview, because he's been doing this for over 50 years. In fact, he was one of the first people to publish Stephen King. He was influential in helping certain writers get credits on comic books, which we'll talk about. And he's written every medium. He was an editor at Disney. He was editor-in-chief of Marvel. He has written television. He's written tie-in novels. He's written comics. He's done literally everything that a creative writing human can do. And so that's why it was so important for me to have him be the first interview that you heard. Now, he's not the first interview I recorded. I actually recorded a couple of interviews before this, which you'll hear in the next weeks. And so I talk about that a little bit in the show. It's a weird fluke of having a show where just because you record something in one order doesn't mean you release them in that order. I wanted to make sure I was ready for this interview. And so I talked to a couple of my friends, excellent guests. But I was nervous during this show. Even you'll listen to it and I feel a little bit nervous. And that's because Marv is the most influential person that I've ever talked to. I mean, he created the Teen Titans. He created Blade. He created Nova. He created Deathstroke, along with dozens, hundreds of other characters over the years that went on to be maybe your favorite character. In fact, he's had more characters turned into movies, TV, video games than anybody except for Stan Lee. So I think we should get into it. Before we do, I wanted to ask that if you do like this show, please subscribe to it. It's very easy. You can do it right on whatever podcast app you're using. But whether you do or not, please head on over to The Complete Creative, because it's been 18 months in the making. It's been something that I've been thinking about since I started the Business of Art. It's a repository for not just this podcast, but also everything that I've learned about building a creative life. There are free courses. There are articles. There are long-form epic essays about how to break and stay in when you're building a creative career. And I'm going to be adding to it. Right now, there's a daily blog, plus archives, plus courses, both free and paid. And it's just a tremendous resource I hope, for everybody who's trying to build a creative business. So head on over to The Complete Creative today and check it out. I promise this is the longest intro you're going to hear in this show. But this is the first one, and I want to make sure you're prepared for it. So most of these episodes are going to be interview. I may intersperse some lessons in there like I used to, but I'm hoping to keep this as an interview show because that's what I loved most about it. And as I go into a new phase of my career, I'm very concerned with doing the things that I loved and doing the things that my audience loved. And you guys seemed to love the interviews more from my conversations with you, from the data. And so that's what I'm going to do. It's very hard to book guests, so I can't promise there will all be interviews, but I'm going to try my best to do the things that you love most. And that's it. That's what I have to say. Subscribe to the show, go to thecompletecreative.com, and get ready to listen to Marv Wolfman, one of the most influential writers in the last 50 years. Just one last thing. We talk about something called the Comics Code Authority and the Comics Code during this episode, and we don't define it, so I'm going to define it for you here. The Comics Code was a self-governing body set up by the comics community in response to, well, let's just say people didn't like comics in the 50s. It was video games before video games were video games, and so there were a lot of rough years in comics, and basically every comic book had to be submitted to the Comics Code and approved by the Comics Code. If you did, you got a little stamp that you were Comics Code approved. If not, well, good luck getting distribution. All right, now that I've defined that, let's get on with the show. Take it away, Marv. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
Oh boy, it's hard. These days it's a little hard because I had a pretty big accident where I hurt myself and was in the hospital for a little bit. So right now my only concern is getting better. I mostly am, but that's where all my attention is spent right now. And the other thing in terms of creative is to keep pushing where I feel I can make a better story and tell the story in a lot better way than I had been previously.
In preparing for this conversation, it was kind of hard because your career has spanned so far and wide for the past for over 50 years now. You were one of the first people to publish Stephen King. You were one of the first people. You were responsible for helping writers get credit on the cover of books, and you created some of the most beloved characters, not just in comics, but in that have been translated to movies and television. I guess
that's why I'm so tired.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot, and I think just to give somebody some scope, I'll ask you to tell my favorite story that you've told me over the years, which is the Wandering Wolfman story. Could you tell a little bit about that story?
Oh gosh. Well, essentially, what back then, and it's hard to understand this because of the way things work, but in the DC mystery comics meaning House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Witching Hour, Tales of the Unexpected, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they all had different host characters. There were a lot, and in House of Secrets, I think it was a character named Abel, because they had Cain in House of Mystery. Anyway, back then, people did not get credit. The writers did not get credit for their stories. They did in the superhero comics, but not in the mystery books, possibly because there were, so many short stories in those books. At any rate, as I say, nobody got a credit for that. But in between each story, there was a single page, an interstitial page, where the host character, in this case, Abel, would introduce the story. It's sort of a leftover from the old EC comics. So the person who wrote the interstitials knew I wrote the very next story that was going to be. So he was leading into a story that I was going to write. And he wrote, the following story was told to me by a Wandering Wolfman. Now, back in that year, I think that's 68 or so, approximately there, the Comics Code did not allow things like werewolves and vampires and Walking Dead and all of those type of things. That was just verboten because of the big problems in the 1950s with that comics were blamed for every ill in the world. But he knew that I wrote it, and and he wrote that following stories by the Wandering Wolfman, knowing it was my name. The Comics Code rejected it. Even though the book was finished and was on its way to the printer and such, the Comic Code rejected it because of the name Wolfman that he put in there. And DC had to explain to them that's his name. That's actually the writer's real name is Marv Wolfman. And they said, if that's his real name, you're going to have to put a credit on there to prove it's not a monster, but the real guy. I don't know how that proves anything, but I guess that's what they were happy for. So that story actually has my very first credit in it, and the very first credit that anyone got in one of the DC Monster magazines. And the page that my name is on, the original artwork, is hanging on my wall in my office.
That's amazing. Now I've been to the office in your house, and it is it's one of the greatest collections of like memorabilia, and it's crazy that it's all from your head. And I know it's not from all your head, but the characters that are there are ones that you created.
Yeah, I slowly, as we got more and more of the characters that I did turned into action figures or statues or whatever else, I had to move the other ones, the ones I didn't create, out of the way because I just had so many. And at this point, there's too many of them to even put on to fill up the room. So I have to alternate the statues and such every so often.
It's awesome. I mean, every time I even think about like what I would like my career to be, it's like I would like to be in a room where all of my characters are sitting there with me.
Yeah, it's a really good feeling because it means that the characters that I created along with, in the case of Teen Titans, George Perez, or in the character Destiny, Bernie Wrightson, or any of the others down the line, it means that those struck a chord in people, and they've kept these characters alive, and so we did our job.
Is there anything that you've been able to pin down that is the difference between a character that endures and one that maybe doesn't pop?
You don't know what's always going to resonate with the fans. There's no way of knowing. If there was, all of us would be hitting it out of the ballpark every single time. The best you can do is just try to do the best job you can and come up with a character that's interesting, a little bit different, but intriguing, and develop the characters in a way that other people just aren't doing it. A lot of people just come out with a character and that's it. But you should try to think of the character's previous life before he or she entered the storylines that we're doing. You have to think of them as real people with a background and with a real cast of characters on their own. And even then, that's no proof that it will strike a chord with anybody. You just have to hope. It's really something that's unpredictable and cannot be manufactured. You can come up with 1,000 characters, and sometimes they'll hit, sometimes they won't, and you just don't know why sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what I've always gleaned from your career is you have created so many incredible characters, and only a fraction of them have endured. What do you think the part of volume, just creating a lot of things, plays and having something that endures? I'm sure it gives you a better chance, right?
No, not really. Because every character is taken on their own. It's not like, well, when you hit the 10 character mark, you're going to have one great character. That's not the way it works. It works that this character, there's something about this specific character that's really of interest. I knew, for instance, that the moment I came up with the idea for Deathstroke, that he was going to be good. I could just tell that one. And because he developed instantly in my head, and his entire supporting cast was already in my head. So I knew that this was a character who resonated, who was good, who was solid, but you don't know if that means the fans are going to enjoy him. I created a character for Daredevil when I wrote it called the Torpedo. I really thought he was going to succeed. Nobody really cared. So you just don't know, and you have to hope. Sometimes it's the right character at the right time, and again, that can't be predicted.
Do you have like a process for how you develop a character?
I try to come up with a backstory because all of us, are the sum of our backstory. Everything that we've done, we do now, is based on things we've done before. Because you learn lessons in life. So you're going to try to replicate the good lessons, and you're going to try to diminish the bad lessons. So we just, create the characters, hope that their backstory, hope that their lives are of interest, hope that you write it well that day. You hope that the artist gets it. There's a million different things. It's not simple, and it's not a numbers game. As I say, it's not that you create 100 characters, there's going to be a good one. You may create 100 bad characters. The fact is, in the history of literature, there there are far more books out there than there are great books out there. So you just do what you can do, and you try to make it. You try to make it as strong a character as you possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a great philosophy. Is just try every single time to make the best character, give it a real, and give it a 3D, and give it a rich life, and then hope for the best.
Yeah, if you're happy with it, that's really the biggest hurdle. Everything else is gravy if people really like it. That's wonderful, but you're writing it for yourself. You're writing it because it has some meaning to you. Therefore, you are, if it succeeds in what you go out to do, what your intent was, then you've already won. The fact that somebody may suddenly decide this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, we have no control over that. The only control we have is the initial creation of the character, and try to reach what we see in our heads and make it work.
Do you have trouble ever leaving characters behind that don't hit, or is it easy for you to just continue to create another one if that one doesn't hit?
My job is to sell books, to write a story that's going to get people interested. If a character isn't interesting and I can't figure out how to make him interesting or her interesting, then yeah, you just move on. You can't just wallow in why isn't this character great. You just try to go on and you try to do a better job the next time. And in fact, you may come out 2 years later with an idea that makes that character great. But again, none of that we can control.
Yeah, I really like your, and I will make you recount it here, but how you went about the process that you used to bring Barry Allen back after Infinite Crisis, or what you would have done, and to make him interesting. I thought it was such a unique twist to make him relevant again, even though DC didn't go for it.
No, it's the idea that I had was plucking him out of the timeline because we had to kill him. That was an instruction. And I had him lost in time so you could plug him out. They thought that Barry Allen was boring. They thought the character Flash was boring. I disagreed, but when we killed him, as per instructions, I left a loophole to bring him back, but bring him back in a way that would be more interesting, I hoped, which was, again, this is pure comic book logic. It doesn't work in the real world, but you pluck him out of the timeline. He's lost in time. You plug him out 1 second of time, and that means he knows from this point on everything he does has to matter, because at any moment the timeline can close in on him. So suddenly you take this character who's sort of laissez-faire, just does whatever he does. He's not exceedingly interesting, though I like the Flash. And now you have a character who's literally running for his life constantly, and that creates a whole different persona for the character. And it could have, I think, helped keep Flash alive. Unfortunately, that's not what was selected, so you move on. I don't own Flash, so I can't make the people who um, do it my way, because frankly, they did it their way. And then somebody like Jeff Johns comes in and he shows them how good the character can be. Somebody is out there, whether it's Jeff or it's a Tom King or a Scott Snyder or whoever the next generation past them, somebody's going to be able to come up with a way to make all these characters even better. Because that's the way the history of comics has always gone.
I'm interested to know how you think creating has changed since the 60s to today, and what you've gleaned that has endured as well.
Well, I think the biggest change is that creators can now own their characters, and you have company characters and you have your own stuff, and that's the biggest change that was not available to any of us back in the late 60s, 70s, pretty much all the 80s. That started really late 90s and into the 21st century. So that's the biggest difference. And back then, if we did own it, to be honest, I think we wouldn't have been able to push the characters into other medium the same way DC and Marvel could. These days, it's different. But back then, we couldn't have done that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think when I think of your career, a lot of creators that I know now, when they're creating their own characters, are upset when something doesn't happen with them in a year or 2 years, or like suddenly they've created something and it's not the biggest movie in the world. And I think of in your career, even a character like Blade that you created in the early 70s didn't have its major motion picture until 25 years later.
Yeah, it takes about 25 years, or it used to. Superman didn't have a hit movie until 40 years later. They had some movie serials and a TV show, but didn't have a movie, and certainly Batman didn't until 1964 with the Adam West Show, and he was created in 1940. So it takes a while for these characters to become popular enough that people want to spend $200 million to make a movie about them. So yeah, that's the big difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's so I think that people don't understand just how expensive a movie is either. When I talk to people who are writing books or people who are creating their stuff, making a big movie or a television show is a sometimes multiple hundreds of $1,000,000 endeavor. It doesn't have to be. It could just be tens of millions of dollars, but even tens of millions is quite a bit more than what it costs to make a comic book or a book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's pretty difficult, but the big thing is it's really difficult to come up with a character that can translate beautifully into film. Not every character can. So hope that you can come up with characters that do work. I don't think there's not a lot of long-term creators who have been able to create more than one or two characters, and it's really difficult if you're thinking only in terms of doing it as a movie, because if you're doing a comic book, you should really be concerned about the comic only. If the other things happen, that's gravy. But if the only reason you're doing a comic book is to sell it as a movie, that's really disrespecting the medium. I may have thoughts of a character could work in a movie, but that's not what I'm doing when I do the comic book. It has to be a comic book script. It has to be a reason you do it in this format.
Right, because there are different things that work. You were talking about comic book logic before. There are things that work in comics that don't work in any other medium, and there are things that work in movies that don't work in comics as well.
Precisely. Things that you have to know the medium that you're working with, and you have to work to make it work. It's not easy.
And you've done a lot of that, of translating stuff to and using characters in multiple mediums. And you've worked on characters that you did in comics, who also now and also written television shows and such on it. Could you talk a little bit about what you see that is different from both of the from like doing a movie or television and doing a comic?
The simplest way of saying it is a comic book is interactive. You are physically in control of the story, the reader. You're in control of how fast the story unfolds. You control the fact that you can just stop and keep looking at a panel and pick out all the artwork. You're in control of timing. TV and movies, you're not in control at all. You are just watching, because the film is going to play as fast as the film plays. That's just the way it is. It's, a film is going to be 2 hours, and it's not going to be shorter unless you actually stop it. But it's going to be the length of time. With a comic or with a book, you are controlling how long you want to spend. You can keep rereading. You can keep trying to think about it. You have to understand how that works. Also, in a movie, you can do things. You just show what's happening, and the viewer goes along with it. Goes along with the ride. But a comic, besides controlling that, you can sort of think about what's happening between the panels, because you can play with that little space between a panel for timing. You can control so much by seeing what happens, and you let the reader, if as a writer, you let the reader come up with their own conclusions as to what's happening in the space between the individual panels. It sounds ridiculous, but it actually works, and it's actually true, because we all sort of leave certain things for the reader to get involved with, and that's that space between the panels where we're telling some more of the story. But you're now creating that part of the story.
I love that you brought that up. Now I can geek out about one of my favorite parts about comics, which is that space between the panels and how you play with it to allow the reader to almost create their own movie within what happened between those panels.
Yeah. It's you have to, as a creator, you have to be thinking about it. You have to think, what is the reader getting out of this? What are they seeing? Very often, you will find in the letter of comments that people send back to you that they have a totally different impression of what happened. Because if you've been a little bit ambiguous, which is a good idea to be, you're involving the reader to partake and to be part of the story.
Well, and that's what makes, for me, that's the interactive part that is the difference between a movie and a comic or a book, is like the reader is imagining what the characters are doing and looking like, at least in some respect. There's always something happening off camera off scene in a comic book or in a book. And that is not necessarily what's happening in a movie. You're seeing and they're showing like what you're supposed to be witnessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you do a writer's workshop, and I love to break down a little bit of that part, especially. I believe I read multiple places that your favorite thing is structure. I've never actually asked you about that, but is that the thing you think you're strongest at?
Yeah. I think I've always felt that the structure of how I set up my stories is the thing I do best. It's the thing I can concentrate on and make, and constantly, I hope, surprise you as you go along. Because if you structure a story correctly, you may have a half dozen sudden oh my God moments during it. The reader, you're leading the reader in a certain way, and if you're just throwing in scenes, that's not going to happen. By structuring it correctly, you could create the mood and the template for what you want the audience to see.
Well, I mean, yeah, for me, that's the only thing that I feel like I can control in a story is the structure. The characters I have characters. I have like decent dialogue, and like I have a level of dialogue, but for me, those things sort of happen organically as I'm writing a book or writing a story. But the structure is something that, like, okay, I know I'm writing to this beat, and as long as I have that sort of waypoint in my mind, everything can line up for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, structure is vital. The dialogue will help you figure out who the characters are. What they do will help you figure out what the characters are. Dialogue is obviously essential, but it's not the only thing. That really, the structure of a story, how the story is put together, will determine whether it works or not.
Can you talk a little bit about how you actually break down your story beats to make a structure work?
It's almost impossible to explain it because it's, for me at least, it's a constant second draft, third draft, fourth draft. Keep working at it, keep honing, keep cutting the things that don't do what you want it to do. Um, it's very intuitive on my side. Uh, there can't be a formula for how I do it because I just don't know. I just know that when I'm writing, I'm thinking in terms of where things are going to change, where there's going to be twists and turns that I could not have come up with had I not very carefully structured the story previously. Because what you want to do is make sure the readers are guided exactly where you want them to go. Enough free space that they can add some of their own ideas, but you're in charge and you need to structure the story correctly to get those points across.
Do you think that comes from a long time in comics? I know that my structure was very much helped when I started writing comics, and I knew that every issue had to be this many pages, and it had to have there were this many page turns, and things had to happen to make the characters turn the page in a way that is not necessarily true as much in books or in any other medium that I've worked in.
I really have never thought in those ways, so I really can't answer that. All I could say is that with a comics, 99% of what I've done is the comics. Yeah, I've done animation, I've done video games, I've done books, I've done all sorts of stuff, but I'd say 99%. So I don't know if I hadn't done comics, would I still have that sense of structure? Because I have done comics, I have had to structure stories that fit exactly that very rigid format that we have. But I don't know if that's the sole reason I've learned how to do it, or that's one of many reasons. Also, it's the type of stories I like. I like to be able to be surprised when I'm reading. So I like to surprise when I'm writing.
I think that's how I like to write and how I like to read stories as well. But I mean, for me, I always knew, like when I started writing comics, like, oh, this issue's about to end, where there has to be a thing that happens to like get them to read the next issue and the next issue. And when I started doing books, it just translated to, okay, this chapter, I got them get them to read the next chapter. So something has to happen at the end of this chapter. And in order for it to happen at the end of this chapter, in the middle of the chapter, this has to happen. And it translated into when I write movies and television as well. When you're finishing a scene, you got to up in the next scene. So for me, all of it, I think, coalesced when I started to write comics.
Yeah, everybody who's a writer is going to find what works best for them. When I do my seminars, I just talk about things that you should think about before you start writing. I never talk about what you do when you write, because that's going to be different for every single person.
You also have been an editor for a large portion of your career as well. Do you think there's anything you could tell the people that are listening that like separates people who get the job from people who don't get the job, or stuff they should be working on if they are looking to get work for DC or Marvel or even any editor?
To me, the best type of editor is the one who will spot the problems, spot what mistakes you've made, and point it out to you that you've made these mistakes, but let you come up with the solutions. All too often, there are editors who want to be writers, and they take your story and make it some other type of story, somebody else's story. A good editor will figure out a work with a writer to plus their story, not their own story. What you need to learn before you can be an editor is how to be critical, and I don't mean negative. I mean to look at it and see where it works, where it doesn't work, possibly how it could work better, figure out the point you're trying to make with the story. Those are the simple ways. I don't know how one gets to work for DC or Marvel or anybody else at this point. I've been on the inside of the box for that long that I don't know new ways of getting into the business are. My assumption is doing things online, self-publishing, et cetera, and hope that somebody sees it or make sure that somebody sees it. But I don't know how one does it today.
That's fair. I know that when I look for something, my goal is to always fill. Like I know what I'm looking for, and then I'm just looking for an artist or a writer who can fill that need instead of. And then I let them work it out themselves. I give them, the structural base. I give them, if it's an artist, I give them a script. If it's a writer, I give them the general like pitch of what I'm looking for, and then they have a lot of latitude because for me as an editor, my job is to hire correctly, and if I hire correctly, my job becomes much easier.
Oh yeah, no, that is, and I should have mentioned that as well because that's something that's always the most important is hire the right people. Uh, if you're an editor, you want to make your job easier. You want to make the story better. So you hire the right people to begin with. That will cut out so much wasted time. You also have to be looking at the people and figure out, can you work well with them? Uh, there are incredibly good writers who will never be part of a group. They will never work well with others. They may be great, but they're great on their own. And the majority of certainly younger talent is not like that. They need somebody to be a disinterested party to look at the material and see how it could be made better or where it's failing or something like that.
Yeah. I always wonder how creators, how editors and creators, a lot of them seem to be hiring somebody and then trying to force them into the style or the world that they're not comfortable inhabiting instead of just spending a lot because for either like it's a friend of theirs or like they didn't do their due diligence or they just hired the first person that showed interest. And if I always tell them if they had spent 10 times longer looking for an artist, they wouldn't have 90% of these headaches.
Yeah, my basic rule of thumb would be never hire a friend. That doesn't mean the person you hire isn't a friend, but don't hire anybody because they're a friend. Hire people who you may be friends with, but they are really good at what they do. If you hire just because somebody is a friend, you will inevitably have problems and may lose that friendship.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, you can have a collaborator who's a great friend, like you and George.
Oh yeah, of course you can.
Can you talk a little bit about how to nurture a collaborative relationship for a long period of time? Because I know you, and especially, like, I know you've had other ones, but I think of you and George Perez as, the classic example of like two creators who have been friends for decades and worked together very successfully for a long period of time.
The simple word respect. If you think that you are far more important than the other person on a project, you will not get along. But you won't get along in real life either. uh, if you are working well with somebody, the basic rule that I had is now George and I never had any major disagreements whatsoever in all the years we worked together because we did respect each other's talent. But if there was a problem, I came in with an idea he didn't like, or he came in with an idea I didn't like, it's easy to throw out the idea completely than fight and create problems. You can always come up with a better idea or at least another idea. So I would rather give up on an idea than have a fight over you have to follow what I want. I will never do that. I work with my people and work with creators. And once we are working together, we try to find the best way of doing whatever it is we're doing. But you have to have respect for the other party before you can do that. You have to understand that there is no absolute answers in a creative field. There is no one way to do anything. And if you can understand that, then you could work with other people too, because they're going to bring in a different set of ideas, many of which may be just as valid as the ideas that you have.
I love that because I find, especially with independent creators, because they're paying the money, they think it's their way, and I've never had success. I've never seen somebody have a great deal of success when they say, no, this is the way that it has to be. It might get a book done at the end of the day, but it does not get it done. It does not make the creators, the artists, or the people that are collaborating with them want to work with them in the future. And often, especially when it's a independent creator, they don't have the money to pay them appropriately if there's another job that they like better that comes along.
Yeah, life's too short, and in the creative field, as I say, you're going to come up with many different solutions to solve a problem. If you're going to have a knockdown, drag-out fight with your collaborator, it's really not worth that. It's only a story. Come up with something better.
Yeah, I like to say there's like two moments. You get two red cards where you can like step your foot down in a project, and so you better use them appropriately or never at all.
I think that you should be able to solve the problem before you have to slam your foot down, because I would, as I say, I would rather just junk the idea if it looks like there's a big fight, and come up with something else that solves the problem that you want and does not alienate the person you're working with.
I like that idea better. I'm going to start doing that from now on instead. One of the things that's come up over and over again as I've done these initial interviews, even though you're the fourth one I've recorded, this is the first one that's going to air, is just planning for the long haul. And as we've talked about this, I can't get past this idea that the things that you're saying about like how to build stories and build relationships really shows that a career spans for 50 years and not 1 year or one project.
Now, if you're real lucky, I'm not putting these people down or anything because I've never met any of them. Not everybody can create the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles first thing out of the gate and be that popular that you don't have to do anything else if you don't want to. That's not going to happen 900% of the time. We're all in the field, we're all working, and we're all trying to make it good. So listen to the other party too. They may have a better idea. Also, if you're a writer, you really have to listen to the artist, because what may take you 5 minutes to write out a paragraph could take them days to draw. And they're going to get far more submersive into it than you ever can as a writer. So they may have incredibly important ideas that say how I can make something visual instead of requiring 1 million words.
Now that I'm in my 5th year doing this professionally and 10th year doing this overall, I really have become much more interested in how to sustain your career, not just how to build it, because lots of careers get built, but very few sustain and have the longevity of your career.
It's really hard to determine how that happens. I think a lot of people get bored. A lot of people alienate other people and burn their bridges. I think I'm always trying something different. So I do novels, I do video games, I do comics, I do short stories, I do whatever else, because to me, if all you do is center on one thing, you're probably going to get bored or start doing things by rote, because that's all you're doing. But when I write a novel or write a novelization, what I learn doing that impacts on my comic writing or my video game writing or something else as well. So I try to write. I knew somebody who years ago complained that unless I was going to only do comics, I should get out of the comic book field. And within a year or two, things that had changed so much, they weren't able to get work in comics. And that made it, they suddenly had to start finding other work someplace down the line. You shouldn't be criticized for not doing only one thing. You should, in fact, be welcome that you can do all sorts of things, so that if you're having problem writing comics this month, work on your novel. If you have problems on your novel, work on something else. There are a million different things you can do to keep your interest there, because once you lose your interest, you're really no longer going to be able to do much of the work.
Yeah, and I love that when you talked about how everything kind of feeds each other, because I've definitely found it in my own career. My my comic writing made my novel writing better, which made my script writing better, which made my comic writing better, which made my copywriting better, and all of those things have sort of fueled together to make me, I feel like, a more complete writer.
The thing I tell people who just want to do comics, I say, do not become a comic book writer. Become a writer who writes comics. Be a writer who writes TV. Be a writer who writes whatever it is. But just don't decide up front all you're going to do is become a comic book writer.
Yeah, you told me a long time ago, you were like, I'm a writer. I write all these things. I'm a writer who happens to write comics and is known for writing comics.
Yeah, I love writing comics. That's my favorite thing to write. Of all the different fields that I'm in, I still love that the most. But I do all the other things too.
Yeah, it really helped me when I was starting to branch out from doing comics, and to have somebody like you say that it's okay to do, and like that you've done all of these things. Because what has happened to me in the past couple of years since I've written a lot of novels is people go, "Oh, are you abandoning comics?" Like, I'm not abandoning comics. I just am a writer who happens to have varied interests that are above comics, above only comics.
None of us have only one interest. So you may as well use all of it.
What is the most difficult thing you've had to overcome in the 50 years of your career?
The most difficult is keeping the interest going, and that I do that by trying different type of things. I may, even if it's a comic, I may try to find a different way of telling the story. So it's the hardest thing is keeping myself excited by everything, because you have to actually think about that. It's not something that's going to happen unless you actually go out of your way to get it to happen.
That is so true. I think that's part of the burnout that people, at least I've had this happen a couple of times. It's just, it was like lack of interest in the subject, or lack of interest in just continuing on, and keeping that interest as I've built my career has become like one of the hardest things for me to do. And the thing that I try to think about a lot more than I did at the beginning, because it's easy at the beginning to have that energy. You know, it's new, it's fresh, it's a thing you haven't done before. But once you've done your 100th convention or released your 15th book or whatever it is, it's like, yeah, this is a job now, and it's a fun job. But it's keeping that interest is something that I've had trouble with in the past year.
Yeah, it's very hard, which is why you have to keep trying something else. If you're not having interest in writing the novel, do something else. Don't let yourself freeze.
All right. So what are you working on now? That's your why. What do you go? What are you looking forward to working on once you're recovered?
Unfortunately, the things I have lined up right now, I can't talk about. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was hoping you were going to say the novel.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to put that one, even though I've written about 70 pages. It's not, and I like the pages I wrote. I'm not getting the overall plot worked through yet. The structure hasn't come yet. And that means I got to spend either more time on it or move to a different book to write.
I really wanted people to hear that part, because it's important to know that it doesn't come easy, even after you've been doing it for as long as you've been doing it.
No, actually, it's harder. If you've done it as long as I have, because you don't want to repeat yourself. You don't want to fall into a habit of how you structure it or how you tell the story or whatever. You want it to be fresh, and that takes more work the more you do, because you've done it so much.
Oh my God, I'm so happy you said that, because that's how I am feeling right now as I'm planning out my next novel. I'm like, how am I going to do this fresh? And I was rereading one of my novels the other day, and I was like, oh, I had that in another novel too that I just wrote. And it's tough when you've been doing it for so long to not repeat yourself.
And it's also hard to look back at the older stuff and not find a million things that you would change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we've been talking for close to an hour. So I think it's time that we wrap up. First, why don't you tell the people where they can find you online?
Facebook, Marv, just my name. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. And my name is the way you find me on both of them. If you're at a convention, if you're at San Diego, I'm in Artist Alley, Table G, I forget what number, but once you're in Artist Alley by G, you'll see me. That's the easiest place to find me.
And do go up and talk to him. I can't tell you how often I'm at a show and I'm like, Marv's here. I'll like, someone will be dressed in like a Raven cosplay. I'm like, he's writing the thing. And it's like, oh, I couldn't. And I'm like, he's very, very nice. And he is extremely excited to talk to humans that like, especially ones that like his work.
I do enjoy that. Yes. It's why I go to conventions. If I didn't, there'd be no reason to go.
Right. And one last thing, which is most of the people who are like doing this are artists or writers or driving to work, and so they're doing another thing while they're listening to us. But I'm going to ask them to come back while you deliver the thing that you would like them to leave this conversation with.
As with anything, the second time you do it, it's going to get a little easier. The third time is going to get a little easier. The fourth time is you're going to develop your ability by keep working at it. Do not give up. If it's something that's real, if you give up, you didn't want it in the first place.
Thank you so much for stopping by, Marv.
You take care.
So that was the legendary Marv Wolfman, and I say that with no sarcasm. He is one of the legends, a living legend in comics, in creating, and I hope you learned a whole heck of a lot from him, because I know I did. If you liked this episode, make sure to go find Marv online. Tell him how much you liked it. Read his work. You probably have read his work before. You've definitely enjoyed some of his characters before. And if you like this show, please subscribe, tell your friends, and head on over to thecompletecreative.com to check out all of our other resources. I created it all for you, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm so happy to be back, and I'm so happy to get to talk to you again. And until next time, have a good day.